And so what about solutions, action opportunities, things that people can do? And I'm wondering if, yeah. Should we start with you, Ricardo?
Work for wage reform. Make sure that all of us support valuing the actual labor, skills, expertise of everybody that's involved in producing, delivering food. The second one, and it cannot be overstressed, is to work for immigration reform. And I suppose I need to be really clear about something. Clearly this is a friendly audience. You've come out of your own on an evening to hear people talk about this topic. But I think often this topic is overlooked. The munificence that I've described earlier can often derive from believing that there are folks that are invading the country and somehow we must, provide charity or find a spot for them. As I've described, without these folks who respond to supply and demand, orthodox economics for labor that Americans will not perform for themselves, and who have been pumped up here, 2 million displaced farmers who produce sugar, coffee, corn in southern Mexico and Central America prior to the NAFTA era, displaced, pumped up here and concentrated in farm fields and meat packers. We actually need to recognize that labor for its value rather than utilize the terrorizing policies, everything that's been described here, as essentially the club or the head of these people to allow them to be exploited. So that needs to be reformed. The Blue Card program that I described or that I mentioned earlier, just because we don't have time, is a program that says if you come here and invest in this country, then there should be a legal path to citizenship for you. You shouldn't be scurrying in the darkness in the way that has been described here. And that's the kind of thinking, the kinds of programs that we need. So work for those kinds of reforms. Work for reforms in the existing pipelines of money that send public resources to specific types of farmers. Now, I'll mention one or two examples. A program that is under threat of elimination because it has no baseline farming in the Farm Bill. It's a program that serves beginning farmers and ranchers, which typically could be urban farmers, farmers and ranchers of color, women. Also, there are very specific programs to serve these populations that are very under-resourced when you think about the massive investment that we make in what we think of as traditional agriculture, what the beneficiaries would refer to as real agriculture, the kind that, quote, feeds the world, not toy agriculture. Looking at those programs and examining the premise of who actually needs the support of public investment in terms of what public interest requires at this moment, and who actually is fearful of not living in the free market economy that otherwise they tout, as the key to economic development. Examining those sorts of programs is really important. Now, there are specific social justice components that also people could shine a light on and help to push in more beneficial ways. This will take probably I have to take shortcuts in explaining this. Many of you are familiar with the sordid history of how black poverty has been created in this country after emancipation. The specific exclusion to this day of the channels for wealth building that are completely open to the rest of us, with probably the most notorious example being specific government policy through housing practices that excluded African-American families from credit that they would have needed to purchase homes and build their wealth, have access, for instance, to the mortgage interest deduction that the rest of us count on just as part of our rights, that essentially sent those folks into the arms of the gray economy and into traps that essentially siphoned their wealth rather than allowed them to build the wealth. Well, I cite that as an example, assuming you're all familiar with, to say exactly the same sort of thing happened among the African-American farming population. And you need to remember that at the time of emancipation, this was, so the early 1860s, the Midwest had not been parceled out. That land had not been parceled out yet to colonists coming from the East. You can bet that the former slaves had not only produced the labor for the plantation crops. Farmers in the South to this day refer to those crops without any sense of irony as the white crops. They're talking about the color of cotton, rice, sugar, and so on. So they not only provided the labor for that, you can bet that those plantation owners were not producing their own food either. So at the time of emancipation, the single population that knew the most about how to produce our food was the African American population. And rather than allow that entrepreneurial energy and creativity to flourish and build, we continue to suppress it with tactics very similar to the redlining tactic that I described for real estate. Well, to get to the point of what you can do to shine a light on a practice that is a relic of that era, the Department of Agriculture is currently under a memorandum of understanding as a result of two multi-billion-dollar suits that the department lost for active discrimination against farmers of color, specifically African-American farmers, but farmers of color in general that are known as the Pigford suits. As a result of the Pigford suits, over $2 billion need to be paid out as reparations to farmers that were essentially driven from their land, African-American farmers who were driven from their land through tactics, remember, the equivalent of redlining for real estate. The average payment to these farmers will be about $50,000 per farm family. But in addition to that, the Pigford settlement asked for loan forgiveness for folks that had been essentially tricked into believing that they owed more than they actually owed for property taxes for their land as one of the elements used to cause them to go into supposed bankruptcy to give up their land. Pushing the Department of Agriculture to actually follow through on those loan forgiveness programs that would allow African-American farmers to apply their entrepreneurship in farming would be one of the ways in which we could deal with the fundamental question here. Why are people hungry? Because they're poor, because they're not earning enough, and these are folks that want to earn their way and have the skills to do that, and our policies do not permit that because we specifically repress and exclude them.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
So I will echo to support comprehensive immigration reform, and I will add to that to oppose proposals, and there currently are proposals in Congress for very harsh and exploitive guest worker programs because we are a nation of immigrants, not guest workers. And so people who come to work in agriculture should be treated with dignity and respect, and they should be given fair wages, and they should have the opportunities to become U.S. citizens and full parts of our country as anyone else has that opportunity. I will also say support labor organizing because, for farm workers specifically, labor organizing is very important. California is the home of United Farm Workers, the home of Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, and their efforts really improved the lives of farm workers, especially in the farms that they organized under the union. But just generally as well, their efforts improved the lives of all farm workers, even those who were not part of the union. So it's important to support labor organizing in any of its forms. And I will add support legal advocacy and legal programs that represent undocumented immigrants and others who may not have access to legal aid because there are restrictions on whom legal aid can serve because they're federally funded programs. And so there are legal services programs who specifically serve those populations who are not able to access legal aid. But legal aid and legal services programs generally are underfunded. And so the supportive funding certainly helps them to help the undocumented and other families who need access to legal rights.
Yeah, Liz?
Ways that you can help, definitely support those bills that will help to protect and preserve the federal nutrition programs. Programs like SNAP, WIC, school lunch, summer meals, those are programs that people rely on, and unfortunately they're not utilized to the full extent that they should be. So join advocacy groups. I know our food bank has a really great advocacy program. if you can, please join those lists so that you can stay informed. And I please let people know that programs that can help provide food for their families is a nutrition program. Those are not welfare programs. Those are nutrition programs, and food is a basic human right, and no one should be going hungry. So we want to ensure that people are participating in those programs that they are eligible for.
Okay. And Liz, just
And-
briefly wrap it up.
Jess.
Jess, or-
Yeah, that's right. First of all, don't fall for half truths, right? When somebody says nobody who's working a full-time job should go hungry, rebut with no one should go hungry, right? Remember that hunger is an indignity no human should experience, and stand up for the truth. And don't settle for half justice, right? We don't need to pit against each other in order to achieve a partial justice. We can achieve a whole justice, but only if we stick to our guns and we're ready for the long haul. So stay with it. And finally, stay informed with a little head tilt to our hosts here. Follow good journalists who are telling the truth about our food systems, like Fern. Educate yourself about, lawsuits and collective bargaining and public policy in the state and the Capitol, and keep coming together like you have today. And congratulations for doing that.
And I'll just add, so there's been a lot of references to the Farm Bill, and that's where these nutrition programs are funded, and the Farm Bill comes around every 5 years, and so it's coming around again. So although a lot of the mechanisms for funding happen in annual appropriations through the budget, the big picture happens within the Farm Bill. So I would, it's a kind of a wonky subject, but I would stay informed about it, because that's where a lot of these changes will be attempted to be made.